I showed up in Berkeley as a Vietnam War kind of runaway guy. I had a degree from Vanderbilt in biology and chemistry in my pocket, and I was looking for what I was going to do. And I was very lucky in running into Mark Erickson. We shared a room in this kind of big house that had 8 bedrooms or something. Anyway, and Mark was working at the North Face. And so, he gave me his secret. You go at 7 a.m. and on Monday morning and ask them if they need anybody. And it took 3 Mondays. And on the third Monday, they said, yeah, you can come in. So I started minimum wage setting grommets in the webbing on the backpacks. And Eustace Boschinger was then still the designer. Mark wasn't the designer yet. Hap was there, Jack was there, of course. But they didn't hire me. I was hired in the manufacturing, which is a different building, by a guy named Tony. So I did that for a while, and then I got into, I got the break of becoming a downer. I got to put the goose down into the sleeping bags and the garments. And the break was you went from minimum wage to piece rate. And yeah, I learned the real beautiful value of piece rate, because you do it right, but then you learn to do it faster, you get more money. It's a good thing. So I did that for a while. And then, I started studying Fuller, and I was really getting into Fuller, and I left in the summer of, I think, 72 to go to Carbondale and University of Southern Illinois. That's where he was. And I attended a World Game workshop anyway, and got really into his geometry. Came back to Berkeley, and this time I talked to Hap personally, and he gave me a job. Come on, let's see what we can do here. And not with tents yet. This is just peripheral at that time. And I'm not, at this time, I'm not a mountain climber. I'm not the active outdoor guy. I was always a runner. I ran quite a bit and was always an athlete, but not necessarily a mountaineer. And it was just production manufacturing. But I brought him a model of the geodesic dome book 1, I'm sure. And Bucky had, Hap had the background. He knew his Don Butts, a friend of his father's, in 1970 wrote a letter to Fuller about the possibility of incorporating his geometry, Bucky's, into the backpacking industry tents. So that already existed. And Hap could see that I was into the possibility of I wanted to make a tent at that point. So I was variously QA manager. I was ombudsman at one point. I was director of engineering at one point. Well, engineering manager, whatever you want to call it. And eventually I became production manager, VP manufacturing, and all that managerial stuff I was pretty good at. So every time, there'd be a job, I would take it. Now, however, when Bob Gillis showed up in 74, and he had his structure with him, and I did send you that little narrative, which I must have written around 77. I don't have a date on that. Anyway, they called me in, of course. So it's Hap, Jack, Mark, and me, and Bob Gillis. And he's got this bigger structure, and he was a minimalist. So he didn't want to cut the fabric. He wanted to just pull the fabric up, and he didn't want us to have money and all that. In fact, he didn't want to wear shoes. He squatted in San Jose in the public forest, and he was barefoot. I visited him several times down there. Anyway, so the first one just wasn't right. We did work, we collaborated. We were kindred souls in a way about tension and structure. All this time, I'm working though in other roles. I'm not in the design. They're not saying, "Oh, you're a tent designer." But with that idea and with Mark's design experience at that point, we turned it into what became the Oval Intention. And that first one was summer of 76, I think, pretty sure, June of 76. And put it in the catalog and use a quote from Synergetics And that's how we got to write a letter to Bucky and say, hey, we used your quote without permission. I hope it's okay. And of course, he comes back and says, oh, it's okay. And in that letter, that's where we offered to show it to him at anywhere in the West Coast. And he said, okay, let's go and come down to Santa Monica. And that's where Mark and I and Bob Gillis and Jim Shirley, who was also quite a player in the early North Face, wrote copy for the catalog, ran the catalog division for a while. A good photographer all around, really solid person. Anyway, we showed up there, and as the story is true, but we knocked on the door of a motel room on the second floor, midway down the hall, and Bucky opens the door, and we were just stunned. There was nobody there, secretary, he didn't have an assistant, just, oh, hi guys, you're here. So we pitched the tent on the balcony for him out there. He loved it. Everybody's seen the pictures. That led to the invitation a few months later in March, I think, to have the Ovals show up at the Now House exhibit in Vancouver. That's how that connection happened. So Bucky then wrote and Hap got all over it, said, this is great, we'll do it. And we put sleeping bags in there. We put our roof sacks in there, I think, at that time. And a couple jackets, even vests, and then the 2 old attention tents were all in there. So at this point, the North Face and geodesics and innovation really started getting tied together. It wasn't just sleeping bags and, what was the Michelin Man coat, all the down jacket, which is kind of like a short sleeping bag with sleeves. That's where the clothing was at that time. The clothing evolved into the mountain jacket, the cagoule, those types of very functional clothing. And in as I was running the factory, we had complete USA production. And we made all of that under one roof: tents, sleeping bags, backpacks, down clothing, Gore-Tex, then soon to come Gore-Tex clothing. And it was quite a big operation. We had 300 people probably working there in Berkeley. In that period, then, I'm trying to remember. Oh yeah, Bucky made the first visit, because now we've had this contact back and forth. So now we've been to the Now House, and we invite him to come visit the North Face. Actually, there's one thing in between. There was Pajaro Dunes, which is a resort on the coast of California, and they had a come and be with a Bucky Fuller event, which I attended. And I had already made up at that point a 5/8 4 frequency, 1.8 meter stand up, walk around, room size geodesic tent, which I pitched for him there. And he was just as enthused as he could be. And he said, by the way, I'm going to Singapore to do a housing event, and I would love to have a model, and I'll buy this one from you. I said, I can't sell you this one. This is just, okay then, will you make me one? I said, sure. Of course. That's how we got the invite for him to come to Berkeley, to the factory headquarters. And he did, and he was so gracious, and he spent lots of time there, met lots of people, and that was October 77. And the North Face is really starting to get a run. We've got a big brand going. Hap was the marketing guy. He was very, very strong from day one, and we're going to make $1 million brand out of this. There's no question. So. And he was doing it. And Jack, of course, was the great salesman of all time. Mark was a very good designer. I mean, we had a good team. Let's just say that. We had a pretty good team going there. And so Bucky comes then, and everybody is really enthused, and we have he talks for an hour and a half, you know, the way he does. Maybe you don't, but he can just talk for an hour. Then we did. Then there was the Jack. I talked to Jack, and Jack was all for this. Let's dedicate the catalog, the next catalog, which was the winter, I think, spring, winter '78. And that's, you did ask me something I'm proud of. I wrote the copy for that. I composed it, picked the pictures. And so that then again became very, very linked with North Face. We had a poem in there. You know, we had just all that stuff of, we can change the world. You know, it's kind of like the Beatles, all you need is love. I mean, we were still there in '78. I was anyway. And most of my colleagues, you know, we really thought, get people outdoors, get them camping. And part of my initiative and my passion was to take that geometry, because just due to where I was, serendipity, who I am, whatever. But I grasped the geometry, the difference between right angles and 60-degree angles, and looking at a structure from the outside versus looking at it from the inside, and how you grow and all that. And anyway, I wanted to get it out of the textbook, because it's not easy to read synergetics. And that was what I thought. He said, okay, we'll just put it on the street, you know, we'll get. And we were able to do that. So that was, then we're up to 78 or 80. And in 82, I sent you that also, I think. Mark and I flew down. We were corresponding with Bucky all this time. And the North Face is just growing and changing, starting to really change too, because we're doing Gore-Tex, of course, the clothing became huge, and just more streetwear, not strictly climbing a rock or climbing a mountain. And then ski wear, of course, came in. So when you do ski wear, by definition, it's functional, you know, and so you have to get into fashion. So the fashion element started coming in. By 82, Mark and I flew down to Pacific Palisades to meet with Bucky and discuss a collaboration on a design, a real Bucky Fuller design for the North Face specific. And of course, Hap's supporting all this, and Jack. I mean, I'm never on my own doing these things, and neither is Mark. But it was similar to the first meeting. We drove up in front of a suburban house, knocked on the door. Bucky opened the door. And no Ann, no, that's his wife, Ann, no other human there. And it's just he and me and Mark. And we started talking, and he's got models, and we're looking at the models. He's saying, I think you need to have an articulating strut that has an elbow. And he kept talking about that. Oh, we got off into housing, and he went off into talking about Russia and arms buildup and money and economics and all that. It was really interesting. And then Mark, being Mark, said, hey, let's get this back to talking about the design we're going to make. What are we going to do here? And we really did come to an agreement. Another letter or two back and forth, and we had an absolute deal. We're going to pay you this much, and then unfortunately that was too close to the end. He died not too long after that. But the second visit to North Face then is what I'm trying to get to. That came out of that. And that was in 83. That was June of 83, because he died in July, 2 weeks before he came and visited the North Face. And that was the dedication of the new office building. So North Face had gotten so big and everything that we went to another piece of property about, a block from the factory, not very far away at all, still in that industrial zone of Berkeley. But he built a very modern, very, very nice building, very expensive building. And Bucky was invited to be the speaker for the dedication. And it was a pretty big deal. You know, the mayor's there and everything. We're creating all these jobs. And here comes Buckminster Fuller to town, which in that San Francisco Bay Area, he was quite well known. And it was like at the height of his popularity too. You know, he was obscure for a long, long time. But anyway, that's when you see Hap and me in the office, and Bucky's sitting there, and he's signing books and doing all that kind of stuff. Then he addresses the whole gathered company in the building. So that was really a good personal event for me. I got to introduce him.
So it sounds like you were working on a plan to create a new version of the tent with Bucky. Is that right? But his passing, what happened with that? Was there a new tent that was going to be designed with him? What was the story there?
The question was, were we ever going to get out of the backpackable mountain climbing, hurricane proof, snow proof thing, and make a more general and bigger? And housing was always in the background. I mean, the Now House event that we were all behind was about, is there any way to break this housing issue, which is still with us? It seems in perpetuity that it's going to be with us. So we wanted to make bigger ones, and we had marketed the 2-meter dome. There were some narrow uses like for that. The starter's hut at the top of the ski race, things like that, but hard to find a market, and completely outside of the market venues, the retail stores. Where do you go get a North Face? I mean, no retail store is going to pitch a 2-meter tent. So, but that was the idea. But it was the same technology as the Oval. I mean, it's arched poles with sleeves, just in beautiful patterns and strong. The pole, there's a couple of pole stories about Easton Aluminum that might be worth talking about a little bit. But the poles were quite a bit bigger than in diameter, stiffer, but still flexible. Anyway. But the idea was to make a true tensegrity tent. I'm not sure if you're.
I made a note to have you explain tensegrity for the listeners.
Okay. The Fuller would talk about the arch. You start with, you build things by stacking up blocks, and then you put a lintel, post and lintel. That's Roman. Then you get an arch, and you can have the viaducts, and then you spin the arch, you can have the cathedral. But you've got all this massive weight, and eventually you have to have things outside to keep the weight in, and that's Notre Dame and all that. But you want to build structure by pulling in, not by stacking. And all the stacking needs the Earth's gravity to keep the stones there, or a little mortar, something like that. He wants to build by using tension elements. And he would say, there's nothing between us and the moon, it just stays there. We are in gravitational tension, the universe, the atoms, everything. There are no things. There's just energy in motion. So he invents the word. He was a wordsmith for sure. And he gets from tension to tensegrity. The integrity of the structure is up to the tension element, not the compression element. The compression element got a slenderness ratio, and they want to bend like a straw. Tension, though, doesn't matter how long you get that 100-pound tension of fishing line, you still got 100-pound strength. So that's what tensegrity means. And the skin then would not be part of the structure at all. You have the structure. And that's where I was before Bob showed up. And the great breakthrough was that the skin and the pole can just take care of it, just like blowing a balloon. They take care of each other. But I always, and so did Hap, so did North, Jack, everybody. We wanted to do a real tensegrity tent, and so did Bucky. That sketch he made for me when we showed him the Oval in January of '97, it was of a tensegrity tent. He wanted a tensegrity tent. Meaning that, okay, you could take the skin off, and the structure would be there and it would be strong and you could, beat on it. And
the
stuff.
fabric isn't what's holding it together. It's
right.
the tension of the poles.
Go back to my role a little bit in the evolution of the company, because I know this is about the outdoor industry and not about tents necessarily or Bucky Fuller necessarily or anything like that. But at that time when we worked on it, Oval, I was probably engineering manager, I think. And I did all of that in overtime or whatever. We got paid salaries back then, and you had a salary, it just didn't matter, you worked. And then at the end of that time, I wanted to be the designers. Can't you just let me be the designer? And Jack said, we just can't afford it. We can't have another salary in there. So they didn't want me to do that. So I actually resigned in December of '76, took a year off, and came back again. And when I came back that next time, that's when I was ombudsman, because there was a little unrest in the factory, so many people, and so many diversity of people, Filipinos, Blacks, Spanish, Chinese from Taiwan, Chinese from mainland, Japanese. We had such a mix of people. And so I tried to do that. We had meetings, and it was a very forward-looking company. We had that anyway. So by that time, let's see, 82, 83, 84, yeah, okay. At that time, sportswear comes in. So it's not just outerwear anymore. We get this idea of we have to grow, we have to have more for the retailer, we have the distribution channels, Japan, Europe, everything. But we need active outdoor sportswear. I was VP manufacturing and sourcing. We had sourcing going on. We had people going to Hong Kong all the time. But a tough game to break into. You don't know clothing. Clothing is not equipment. And there are people who've been doing it for so long that are so we would try to get beautiful fabrics and all that, and we couldn't get to the minimum buy. You say, well, you need to buy 8,000 yards of that or something. So how about 300 yards? Things like that would be going on. And we had the problem of inventory build that you can't get rid of, because in the equipment business, you have to innovate and you have to keep changing, and your product could get stale and you could get old. Other guys can run past you, but you have a new cycle. You can catch up. You can do that. In the clothing business, if you miss the color, if you miss the spring, and we would have our 12 sales reps in the meeting, one from each area of the country, and you'd show them a garment and you'd say, well, what's the number one color? You'd be lucky if you could get number one color. You'd say, okay, what's the number two color? It's absolutely not going to get there. What's number three? What's number four? I mean, what works in LA just doesn't work in Maine necessarily. So we would have these problems where you'd have to go to Hong Kong and make a buy. You'd buy 1,000 of this particular style, and you'd sell 400 of them, and you had 600 of them. And now it's getting to be winter. And that's when the invention of the factory outlet really came through. The factory outlets, they used to have bargain basements in department stores, similar idea, but they were very, very helpful. The whole retail problem of North Face and being a wholesaler and trying to be a retailer became a little bit of an issue. For example, if you have a beautiful store in a perfect location in a good middle-sized town, and the North Face brand is predominant in this guy's store. And then he gets a call one day and he says, by the way, we're going to build our own store 2 blocks down the street from me. It makes it a little hard for the wholesale division. So there would be conflicts between the guy who's responsible for wholesale sales and the guy responsible for retail sales. So eventually we've got about 13 or so first line retail, and we've got about 6 or so outlets. And the factory outlets were profitable, and a few of the retail stores were really struggling. It was very competitive by that point. That's when there were some real conflicts starting to happen. Within the management happened. Jack actually had some disagreements. Then there was an incident with the board where one of Hap's father's friends had helped him from the beginning, been on the board, had investment, and he died. So at the next board meeting, his son inherited the seat in the stock, showed up, and he was not too happy about, you have all this in play, you've got this beautiful brand, you've got all this, but you're not making much return on the investment. So that kind of hard business stuff started coming in. And Jack realized, well, Sierra Designs also, now Sierra Designs is in Berkeley too. We were head-to-head rivals for years. They had problems. They were bought and sold. North Face bought Sierra Designs. I think you probably are well aware of this history. At that time, we didn't have an executive to go take over, so I got that role. So, okay, you are now going to try to run Sierra Designs. And I didn't know much at all about, well, I knew almost nothing about sales and marketing, let's say that. But I started going to the sales meetings and just getting well. But Jack, through that, they were almost completely sourced. They had done manufacturing, but they learned about sourcing much faster than we do, and probably on my shoulders that we didn't learn it fast enough and get the real notion of, hey, it's going offshore. I don't care how good your factory is. I don't care how good you're doing. The epiphany for me, Shanghai, 7th floor of a building in downtown Shanghai, and they have a cutting floor. Now we had cutting tables. We had 17 of them. We had the best equipment. People could ride on them and back and forth. They'd see a flaw, stop, back up, lay fabric over it. Unbelievable. But I go into this room. It's a 100-foot long table at least, and there are like 8 dudes on each side of the table. And the first 2 take the fabric and walk about 3 yards and hand it to the second 2. They walk about 3 yards and hand it. And you're just going, that's it. Well, and with Jack, to go back to that, he picked that up from Paul from Sierra Designs about this is it. And so he started a new division called Windy Bass. Mm. So now not only do we have the 2 brands, North Face, Sierra Designs, now we have Windy Bass. Now there's all kinds of other resource conflicts and all that. And that's why I sent you that one picture about the opening of the South Coast Plaza retail. Now this is not the North Face that I walked into. This was not the little store on Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley that had a little bit of Chenard pitons and Caribbean mountain pack. This was big time theater, almost retail as theater. It's my version, my view. And I did build a structure just for that store. quarter sphere on each side of the glass entry above the doorway, big entry. And when you walked under, you got that whole geodesic pattern feeling, and two were sandwiching the door, the area above the door. But you see that picture, and I look at it and I go, I bet you there's $500 worth of ties on that group of people. You know, look at me and Hap and Jack and Mark. And we were a little bit different from the Ragley camper out there. And the business was changing so fast. And go back to the board meeting with the new board member and this conflict that was developing. And that store cost a lot of money. And there was a challenge in the board meeting where, geez, half that store cost you $700,000, something, whatever. No, Hap says no. $500,000 max. It never overran. Well, Jack, I just looked at his name, slipped my mind for a minute here, but the CEO of finance, the financial guy, Jeff Core. Jeff is sitting there and he goes, Hap, $750,000. You want me to put it on the table here? I will, but it costs $750,000 to open this. Similar thing had happened when we built the new office building. It was the first time I really heard any kind of a little bit of a wow, because Jack says, Hap, you know, I have to sell another $3 million worth of product to pay for the rent on this building, something like that. You know, like, why did we have to build this? So that's where it got the innocence. Got just evaporated. There were board meetings, and then Hans came in because since Jack took over when he passed, we didn't have a VP of sales anymore. Hans Jones comes in to be VP of sales. Hans was an investor in the company, and a very good person, a very good man too. But he felt equal to Hap in every way, and he started being very influential. So this struggle comes up, and there was a board meeting where there were almost as many lawyers as us. And Jack asked Hap something, you know, like, I don't know. And Hap turns and says, my lawyer will answer that. And Jack got so mad. He says, God damn it. We've been together for 30 years or whatever it was, you know. But no, the lawyers were answering him. And that led to how I got to be now the executive officer. Okay, now, if I didn't send you the interlinking sketch, and I do have some papers you might like about the OI, Odyssey International, and Bill Simon and that whole thing. And Bill gets to buy the company through lots of leverage and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, he draws me a sketch, and at the top there's OII, then over here there's OIL, and over here there's OILLE or something like that, and then down over here, oh, there's North Vegas, and there's Sierra Designs. Oh, okay, I think I kind of get some idea where we are, but we're nowhere near the top. And he tried to hire an executive, and he just didn't find one. So he said, all right, Bruce, you can do this. You're the guy. But of course, he's in charge. There's no question who's in charge. He bought it. He and I are pretty much just oil and water at that point. And he runs garment making factories through his family, through his wife. Um, his wife's father was one of the garment kingpins of Hong Kong in Shenzhen, the industrial zone just inland in mainland China from Hong Kong. So Bill, one of the very first things is, all right, I got 600 downfill bags I'm getting for you, and we're going to send them in. Well, they arrive and they're like flat like pancakes, right? So we have to say, I mean, you know, what do you get in a goose down bag if the goose down's not good? So that's kind of thing we were starting to struggle with. Set up a line, open all the bags up, take all the duck down and beaks and claws out of it, put some really good down in there, things like that. And then the deliveries. Then there was this was an interesting moment. Going over the budget, trying to get the next year together. Sales are not everything we want them to be. So he says, all right, you put $1 million worth of women's mid-priced ski wear in there. I said, but Bill, Mark and Dana, not Dana, maybe Dana, they were the designers, and she was overwhelmed, and she was pretty good at ski wear. We had extreme gear. We had our own a whole line to develop. Bill says, don't worry, no, I got a designer in Hong Kong. I said, but Bill, is she a skier? You don't have to be a skier. She's a designer. We'll get you a line, don't worry. All right, so we put that $1 million in there. Of course, that realized absolutely zero. We never got the line. Deliveries were very late. That's when we had all the disruption in the magazines. The people were saying, you know, they can't deliver. Typical type of desperation. You got the ski pants, but you don't have the jackets for this two that go together. And then you get the word, well, ship the pants anyway. Well, how would you like to be the retailer and you got the pants? You know, that's the kind of thing. And so I didn't, and by this time too, Hap's gone, Jack's gone, Mark's gone. I'm like one of the few from '74. There are certainly people there earlier than me, but the band is broken up. there's no more band, so it didn't take very long for me and Bill to have a parting of the ways. Now, yes, it's true that Sally McCoy, who was the marketing VP at that time, did climb Mount Everest, attempted. She got stormed out at the top, almost made it. But when she went on that trip, it was a great pride that she really did use North Face stuff. Head to toe, tents, the whole thing. We were still bona fide. And I think today they still are fairly bona fide, but she came to my office one day and said, Bruce, we're having a little trouble deciding whether the long cotton skirt will sell more or less than the short pleated cotton skirt. And I was done. I just couldn't relate to that, you know. I wanted to make structures. So that was the end of my 19 years there. I did move on to Yakima, mainly due to lifestyle change. We'd been in the East Bay and in the urban America for quite a while. And Arcata is a special little town right off the coast. And we said, hey, let's, and I had job offers, but I didn't want the big job anymore. I was kind of going like, and it was a bit of a, executive for hire, and they need a manager. They were growing like crazy in the mountain bike boom now, and people were buying smaller cars because of oil problems and all that. So they put the bike on top of the car. Oh, great, super idea. Well, you need a rack. Well, there you go. And the company was founded by a guy who made racks to carry ladders to pick apples in Yakima, Washington, hence the name. It's not Japanese. It's from Yakima apples picking. And they took that and they made a kayak foot brace and they made a couple things, and then mountain biking hit. They grew very fast, but it was in real need of structure. My specialty.
What was the outdoor industry like at that time in Arcata? I've interviewed a few people who were starting companies. One in particular, we talked with the founders of Down Home, sleeping bag company that was there, and it's called Down Home.
I never know.
It was Chuck and Denise. They had started a gear store called the Arcata Transit Authority, and they were selling outdoor products out of this bike shop. And they're kind of the originators, from what I understand in my conversations with them. They were kind of one of the catalysts for the outdoor industry growing in Arcata. It's because they started this gear shop, and then it led to companies like Moonstone with Fred Williams starting that, and Blue Puma, starting there as well, and then Yakima. We had a whole conversation I ought to share with you about their origins in that region, and Arcata of all places becoming this little hotbed.
Before I got it. That was before I got up here.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
But Fred was still here. Moonstone Mountaineering was here, and Kokatat, of course.
Right.
Yeah. But the roof rack, Yakima it was almost car parts. I mean, Don Banducci, I don't know if you've run into him yet, but boy, if you ever get a chance to interview Don, it would be a good interview. But he's not really outdoor industry. Well, yeah, it is, I guess. I mean, kayaks.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Don Banducci was really charismatic and creative, brilliant. And he made it into much more of a sporting goods thing instead of thinking of it as a car part. You don't go sell it down at the used parts, or the parts, what do you call those places where you go with get your car parts. Anyway, you sell it in sporting goods, and he did a great job. Well, and he teamed up with REI. That was the great hookup. And REI and Yakima wrote the REI coattails for quite a while, and they did really good. Then the quirk of fate, as where the wheel turns, people stopped making the cars smaller and started making them bigger. It's a crazy thing. Just put your bike in the back. You got an SUV. Anyway, I did that for 8 years. It was a great working experience, and no regrets. The kids grew up here. Beautiful place. Stumbled into the guitar business I retired. I did a little stint with outdoor whitewater rafting company called Wing Inflatables. I helped that company for quite a while and grew it. And I retired basically, really. I was 60 and said, that's it. I'm going to just do something else. And this little company was failing. It had been sold and the contract broken, and there was 3 employees left, and they were about to go home. So I bought it. And that was 1 year before the 2008-9 financial crash. So then we had that little crash. Our sales dropped 30% right away, but we got through that. And now we have a thriving little business. Electric guitar bodies and necks. And it's very specialized. It's all tone wood and not even acoustic. We do electric. And we make really good necks. We have a brand recognition from all the way Japan to England and Europe. So
what's the name of the company for listeners?
Well, it's called Wildwood Manufacturing. Started in a retail store here in Arcata called Wildwood Music, and that's what But you wouldn't know us because our customers are the luthiers. They're the guys who actually paint and hook up the electronics, make the tone, and decide. We are like who makes the seats for your car. You know,
Right.
you have good seats, but Toyota or whatever. Okay, how we do?
It sounds like, I don't know, like the common thread between a lot of these different stages of your career is product creation, right? And being involved in that process. Was that something that you always were gravitating towards? Like when you were younger, did you find yourself to be a creative person, or is that something that you feel like you discovered later on when you stumbled into the North Face offices? Where did that come from for you?
I think it's strictly the geometry, energetics, tension structure. I happen to have one right here. I mean, you can take a quick little look, but this is the type of thing I make. Can you see this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is Easton Aluminum, by the way.
Right. A huge partner, huge reason why the tent got to where it was, right? Big contributor.
Well, they made arrow shafts. That's what the technology evolved out of.
Right.
And again, it was Mark and I got on an airplane. We flew down to Van Nuys and met with Jim Easton, the guy that ran the Olympics that year. Sat in his office, and we had a structure close to the oval. We were getting close to the oval, but it had fiberglass rods in it. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of getting pieces of fiberglass in your hand, but it's not comfortable. And then, and we said, Mr. Easton, can you make this? And he said, definitely. So then it became iterative. We tried which kind of aluminum. Well, all the tents that, and by the way, the tenting at North Face, when I got there were two tents, and they both had these 5/8 inch soft 6061 aluminum thin-walled tubes. One of them was called the Tuolumne tent, which had just enough for two dudes to sleep, and really one, unless you were climbing a rock. You didn't, two of you maybe could sleep in it. One pole at the one end and the A at the other, and the other was called a mountain tent, 2 A-frames, fabrics drooping and on you, getting wet, all that kind of stuff. So to go to this arched, sprung aluminum, it's very different. You couldn't bend those, so they just crimp if you try to bend a A-frame tent pole. So he started with 70, 75, and the problem was it just took a set. So it didn't have the resiliency, the spring back. So then we went and tried a harder aluminum, which was the 70, 71, or I'm not sure the numbers, but and it definitely worked. Then we had to get the connector, the insert, and it was stronger than the pole wall, and it would leverage and break the wall. So we had that breakage. Fixed that somehow. Then we sell into production. There's hundreds of them out in the field by this point, and I'm still there in VP manufacturing, whatever, engineering, quality control, all that. And I get a call, and a guy says, "My pole's broke." Okay, what happened? Nothing. We were on the beach, and stress corrosion cracking. Okay, well. I said, come on, we're going to replace your poles. Don't worry. We're going to send you poles. We got your way. What happened? Did a bear hit the tent or something? Because we have so many other stories where it withheld 12 inches of snow, 15. Well, and it was just salt water from the beach, having a little bit of salt water get in there and the aluminum. So we got through that, But it wasn't like Easton was a partner or anything. They were a vendor. They were a good vendor, and they're a very good techno. And I use their tubes in my structures here.
Right.
But no, I'm not really a creative guy like that. I'm much more of a technician type. Math came easily to me for some reason.
Right.
Poetry, probably not.
Well, I'm curious. It seems like around this time and even before, you start seeing, well, if we look at the larger outdoor industry, you kind of see the influence of people who come with more of an engineering mind or come from other industries to contribute to outdoor products. And one in particular, Jack Stevenson, is one that comes to mind, and the work that he was doing in the late 50s, early 60s, I think, with his elliptical arch tent. And then I think about, I don't know, it just seems like innovation comes to the outdoor industry when you have some of these outside voices or people who come with a different background and inject that into the outdoor industry. And that's where you get things like the oval intention, right? This inspiration that comes from geodesics, right? And that's infused into the industry. And that's where you see something new and exciting that really takes off. What are your thoughts on that? I've kind of seen that consistently when I've been looking at this history, whether it's a Jack Stevenson with bringing his experience, or a Bill Moss, kind of relevant to the tent space, right? Kind of a pure artist, right? Coming with a different perspective and then changing what a tent or a shelter could be, with his unique perspective as an artist. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's the way of industry. I think it's the way of free markets, individual initiative, technology, materials science, developing, growing, and yeah, then well, this is my passion. Maybe I'm a rock climber. Well, maybe I should make a better peat because the ones I use aren't very good. Well, what are the materials available? Well, at that point, maybe there's a new material. Yeah, we couldn't have made the oval without that aluminum pole. Really, it wouldn't have been the same thing at all. So yeah, Easton in that sense, very important. And when you say the one thing, I would just use the word geodesics. It's tossed around pretty carelessly. And the North Face, after I had left and was long gone, but they started making some new tents, and I'd get a new catalog, and it would say, "This is a geodesic tent." Well, it's not all geodesic tent. It's a hoop tent, yeah. But like you say, there were hoop tents. There's always been hoop tents. But the inspiration is synergetics geometry. This is the big inspiration, which leads you to geodesics. Spinning, the fact that Fuller would say there are no things. You're never going to get to the quark, to the last building block of the atom. There is no building block. There is only energy, always in motion, and gravity. And between those two things, you get all the incredible structures that you find in that catalog dedication. You ever see a cubical apple or whatever I said, don't be square. So this right angle problem of Newton and Descartes and the Cartesian coordinate, that's what I'm trying to get to. The Cartesian coordinate, the right angle coordinate, you can do an awful lot with that. You can obviously land a man on the moon and everything like that. But it's a fundamental mistake. And you're seeing things from the outside. So Fuller, you get inside. You always look at stuff from the inside. That is my contribution. Even in these structures, I have made contributions. But creativity, to me, I tinker. I have a shop in my garage. I think one of the great inventions of suburban life is the big garage. And I know people live in apartments and all that, but man, just to have your own workshop that's right there. I think. So I do, and I tinker a lot. And a lot of things only, I don't create them. I mean, you hear a guy say, or a woman, well, that song just came to me. I wrote it in 15 minutes. And that's kind of what happens to me sometimes. I'll be doing something all that night. You just, so the idea was probably always there, but it just, if you're not doing hands using it, maybe you don't stumble on it. So I stumble on things.
Right.
Yeah, the outdoor industry and me, it was just a crossing of paths. It wasn't like Yvon Chouinard or Royal Robbins or people like that who I have the greatest respect for. One thing I did want to mention, I forgot about, but I would like, do I have time to say one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
One of the things I did too as executive, and it caused some real friction between me and Bill Simon, was when Will Steger was putting together his Antarctic mission to cross the Antarctic with dog sled. And he put the international group together. There was a Chinese, a Japanese, French, British, and an American. Well, those six. And the North Face outfitted them completely. Many, many layers of garments. Each one had to be tailored because they were different sizes, and they had to have. And we spent a lot of money on that. And Sally was behind that, and Mark and me, and Will came many times to the factory, and we made special tents for them. Just everything, And there's going to be this North Face. What did we call it? It had a name. Naturally, all these lines have names, but the Polar Crossing or something like that was one. It doesn't matter. But we were going to make sales on this thing, so we we're going to have special little boutiques in the retail store. It just didn't happen. So it was one of those things where you sponsor and you put all this out, and we didn't get anything back for it. But it was a noble thing to do, and the North Face, I think, well, of course, I was behind it. I think it was a good thing. And he did it. He succeeded. He got great publicity and fame, and he's a really good man.
Well, I feel like, as you described your contributions and your part in the history of the North Face, it's clear that you saw the outdoor industry as well as the company going through monumental changes, right? The changes that you saw at the North Face were common among companies across the industry, right? This move from privately held company to selling to a corporate entity, or this larger movement to manufacturing product overseas. I mean, you were at the helm during a very interesting time, not only for the North Face but for the industry, which it's interesting to hear that perspective. All these massive changes that are happening that we're still seeing today in the industry currently. I think we continue to see this corporatization of the outdoor industry. I mean, you look at the North Face now and you probably wouldn't recognize it in a lot of ways, right? Being part of a VF corporation. It's just interesting to see, what you were facing. There's a lot of that's still happening in the industry today, or movement towards that.
Yeah, back in the earlier days, we used to make fun of Eddie Bauer Goose Down because it was, and the North Face to me today is the clothing brand.
Right.
That needs authenticity.
Yeah.
They even invited me back. I was down there about, not even 2 years ago, approximately. And they were interviewing Mark, they were interviewing Hap, and they were wanting to put a little bit of the authenticity, is almost what they called it, back in, here's the guy who actually did this. It's difficult, but one thing, Chase, I'll say to you, in my view of industry and all that, any hardware that you make is difficult to go and scale up.
Right.
It's just difficult. You can use a tennis racket for years and years and years, You buy one tent and you've got a tent, but you could always need new rags, is what I always called them. And so almost all the hardware guys turn to clothing at some point.
Yeah.
And then you have this issue of authenticity, you know.
Right. I had a similar conversation with his name's Don Wittenberger. He started the Yak Works. It's a pack company, and he eventually went on and he now owns Rivendell Mountain Works, another pack company inspired by Don Jensen. But in either case, he had told me that was our struggle when we started our small pack company. Is we made good stuff, and because we made good stuff, people didn't need to come back to us for anything else. They didn't have to come back and buy another pack because the pack they had was going to last them for a couple decades. And I think that's another theme that we're seeing. If we want to bring this into the present day, right? That's a very common theme of the industry today is, movement towards apparel, right? Because it is so seasonal. You have to buy more of it, and you can reach a wider audience, right? Not everyone is going to need a tent, but everyone goes out and walks, in a normal year, right? Will have to walk from their car to work during, in the cold, and they need a jacket, so there's that component too, and we're definitely seeing more of that today, right? Companies like the North Face, even companies like Black Diamond, we work closely with them, and there's been a big movement on their part to move into apparel just because you can reach more people, right? So it's interesting to see that happening back when you were with the North Face, and it's a continuous movement towards that. It's not a new trend that we're seeing. This has kind of been a larger movement towards apparel for a lot of these companies.
In running companies and thinking about the return and what you're trying to do as a financial entity, as opposed to a creative entity or social, or you driving the revenue is the number one way to get healthy.
Yeah.
You just need to have the sales growth, and then the sales people come to you and say, "Hey, I'm doing everything I can do. You give me something to sell."
Yeah.
So how about what was Mark's first urban jacket? What did he call that? I can't remember. But all of a sudden it was so different. It's like, but now you go to the supermarket and the people stocking the shelves are wearing North Face jackets. The cashiers are wearing North Face jackets.
Right.
It's a urban wear until the logo gets too common.
Right. It's interesting you bring up the logo. I just did one of these with David Alcorn, and we talked quite a bit about his part in designing the logo, and how he feels about it today. And so that hasn't come out yet. Well, but maybe by the time this comes out, it'll have been published, but I'll make sure to share that with you. We had a really good conversation, and it was fun.
Have you run across Martin Zamitis, by the way?
No, but that name keeps coming up. I've talked with people who work with him, with Sling Fin.
He and I worked together at North Face. He came in as a pack designer.
Okay.
But Sling Fin is his thing. He probably makes the best tent today, in my view.
Yeah, I've talked with Al Tabor.
Yeah, I know Al too.
Yeah, awesome. and he's mentioned him. He's on my list for sure.
Good.
It's a long list. Do you mind if I pull up some of these pictures and maybe I can get your thoughts on a few of these just for context?
Probably my favorite picture.
Yeah, this is a great one. Is this a picture that you have currently? The original?
Probably.
That's great. Yeah, what's going on here? I've never seen this picture.
Okay. This again is getting the geometry in the streets. All right. This is there was the height of the running boom, and I was a runner, but in San Francisco they have a race called Beta Breakers. Started down at Fisherman's Wharf, ran through downtown and up over the hill, and all the way out to the ocean, 7.5 miles, 200 or 300 feet of elevation in the middle. But it was a costume contest. It would draw 100,000 people at the height. And being San Francisco, people ran naked, people did everything. It was crazy, you know. But they had this concept of the costume, and I made up the one man running ball size medium as a costume, and I used the backpack frame with the articulating hip belt joint that Mark and Tom Mann made famous. Can't remember the name of it at the moment. And I built a complete sphere and clothed it and hooked it to the backpack and ran in it. And I won that contest. So that year, that was
which one are you here?
Oh, I'm the guy standing in the middle holding hands.
Oh, you're the one in the middle. Okay.
Yeah. I was.
But
like,
you wore one. Did you wear one of these?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So first I did the one man size medium, and it didn't have a head. It was just a sphere.
Okay.
A costume. And I only won that, just as an aside, because I showed up at the starting line and I had it in the stuff sack on the backpack, just on my back. Took out a tablecloth and assembled it right there. And the judges were there and they saw me just put it together and get inside. Anyway, then I took that theme, and I have pictures of this too, you might like to see, but I scaled them because we were doing clothing now. We were doing extra large. This is Jeff Core. He's the biggest guy. He was the VP of Finance, and that was extra large. Then we had larges and mediums. And the other contest was called Centipede. You had to have 13 people. So these each hooked together, and they had to be hooked together. The hands joined with Velcro. And then we ran, and I have pictures of that I could show you too. And but we won. It took us 3 years. We didn't win the first year. We didn't win the second. Third year, we won it. App wrote a very nice letter about leadership, and because to get all North Face employees to run 7.5 miles, I mean, you had to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
And we trained and all that stuff. So yeah, that's one of my favorite pictures.
And you call these ball beings.
Yeah, I call the ball beings. Yeah. This is another favorite picture. This is the 3-meter tent that we built for him that he took on his trip that he asked me to make. That's Jack Gilbert.
In the back left with the mustache?
Tall guy, yeah, with mustache.
Yep, okay. I recognize a couple of people here, but and you
Jamie's
and are you which are you here in the front?
Oh yeah, I've got the vest on with the.
You're okay with the vest.
Yeah, there's the same.
Is you giving that introduction you mentioned?
Yeah, this is the dedication of the new office building. And Bucky's getting ready to talk. He's sitting right there. This is his answer about, yes, I will make a design for you. See where it says, we'll show you, we propose a small working model. There are 2 attractive directions to go. We'll let you consider both. So this is where he accepted the offer from the North Face to create a new design.
Oh, amazing.
Yes, pretty good. This is January of 76 when we took down to his motel room in Santa Monica.
Well, and maybe this is a good time to mention, because you can clearly see the rings on there. I know that was a big discussion, or a big point of, I don't know, just discussion among the designers between Bob Gillis and his design and the fastening system that he had versus what ultimately ended up being the system used to hold the tent. Is that right? I know that because he has some patents, but it didn't end up being what the oval intention ended up becoming. But he had a lot of patents, it sounded like, on the fastening system.
He did, and but Chase, in patent disputes, which I've been through a few at a top kind of struggle with patent lawyers and intellectual property things, the narrower the patent is, the easier it is to get.
Mm.
So when you have a patent on something very narrow, and you come into a dispute, it's very natural for the other party to say, okay, let's see if we can design our way around that.
Mm.
What is it exactly here? And what he had, the patent that we licensed from him was poles crossing in a ring.
Mm.
and then inner fabric suspended from it. So it was very easy to, if you look at that picture, in between the crossings of the poles, we put a sleeve. So no poles crossed, and it had some advantages too, the sleeve.
Right.
And it never would have happened if we hadn't gone to the Now House and Bob showed up at the Now House in Vancouver with a structure that was smaller than he was allowed to make under the license. In other words, we had small, and we said, okay, after small, Bob, we don't care, you can do anything you want. Well, he made one smaller than that deal, and he had it for sale with pamphlets and everything. And
was that under his own brand that he had developed at that time?
Right.
Was that under the Shelter Systems brand that he ended up starting?
Yeah, right.
It's I talked with his wife, and I know he's aging and sounds like he's not in great health right now, and that's where we were able to work with his family to secure the patents, and we're working on the sketchbooks right now and a lot of his work that way to help preserve his contributions. But his wife walked me around the house, and I was able to see kind of his little work area, and I imagine it's similar to you. A lot of miniature models of domes. I saw that, and after talking with you a little bit and seeing some of the models that you have around, I could see how I can only imagine what some of the early days of coming up with designs might have been with people so passionate about this type of product.
Well, and his contribution was not just the ring, and it was the notion that you didn't need an external frame and then hang a skin. You could pull the skin out with the flexible wand, pull the wand in with the skin. It was more than that. Because when we saw the first one, that's why I sent you that. The first time he came, he had straight poles that were forced into a hard thing that he pulled down. And it really wasn't a tensegrity. He was calling them tensegrities. I didn't accept that as a tensegrity, but anyway. When he came back with this, and that's why I sent you that other picture, that the dark picture where it shows the little one. See if you have that there. I think you do. That's the office. That's the dedication. This is earlier. That's from 77.
Is that big one on the right, the green and red one? Is that larger version that you had worked on together? So is this this would be the inside?
Yes.
Of this one, right?
Yes, that's the one on the right. That green and brown one. There's
right.
The
okay.
Catalog. It's just a good picture of Hap. This is Bob. This is Gillis.
Okay.
See, and he doesn't want to cut all those pieces, and that's where by being in a garment factory and a piecing factory where we made everything, it's very natural for me to piece it. And he doesn't want to. He just wants to pull it. But go to the next picture. Can you zoom in on that a little bit?
I can.
Just for your own self or not? Okay, look how the fabric is just limp in there and loose. And you could never get it taut because you have fabric as a weave, and you're pulling. And that's what we did. We cut it and then put it together so that it was strong on it and everything like that. But this idea, when he showed that to Hap and Jack and me and Mark, and they turned to me and said, "What do you think?" And I went immediately, "Yes, that's it."
So this is a Gillis right here.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. That is the model. I think that is the exact, because he sent these pictures back to Jack later. This was what we saw when we decided to try to get a license with him. And then this is what we made of it, right?
Is that you on the inside there?
Oh yeah, that's me. Yeah.
So you doubled as a model throughout all of this. Model for the catalog.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, and then there's synergetics. Is that where you had to go get permission to use that?
Right. That's his opus magnus. I mean, it's a
Right.
2-volume thing that he worked on for 50 years.
Right. And then this one's sideways.
That's that's the letter to ask him to
Oh,
make the deal, and then that short one that says personal on it was the reply to this letter.
right. Okay.
This is
Now this gives me some. This looks a little bit like a Bill Moss, or it's got some Bill Moss-esque flourish to it. I don't know if that's where some of that came from, or that's kind of where the industry was. But anyways,
well, this is almost not back packing outdoor industry.
right,
This is the stretch toward trying to make something besides just a backpackable outdoor structure.
right.
That's what we call a 2-meter dome.
Okay,
And I did all the pattern work and all of that completely. And then the outside, when you put the yellow is completely separate. You can look through the door,
right,
kind of see green and yellow. So it's that same pattern of geodesic, but then you drape the outer skin, and then you just have to, fabric just wants to make.
right. So you were hoping there was going to be an iteration on this that you were going to work with Bucky on, or that was the intention to do that?
Yes.
Okay. So kind of an iteration on this. What would have been some of those big changes that you feel like? What do you feel like was the next step that didn't happen?
Okay. It would have been a true tensegrity tent. Again, this is not a tensegrity tent. This is a geodesic shaped hoop tent, kind
Okay.
of. Okay. And it would have been an industrial made, I'm trying to think of something that breaks in the middle that you might think of, maybe like a cane, but it's a stiff, straight compression member, not arched with resilient spring, stiff, but hinged. So so you can leave it all attached even if you wanted to. And then you get there and you just walk around and go, boom, and it has like an over the center, and then it's there. And you know, to break it down, you pop it like that. You see, you can't see my arms, or can you?
Yeah.
So it would have been something like that. But again, we never saw what he talked about it. I have a transcript when Mark and I were with him at his house. And we were trying to get neither Mark or I really got it. And I even reread it a couple times. It's pretty hard. And he never drew it, but he would have. He was ready to. That visit in June of '83, when he had dinner at my house that night. By the way, hamburger and fruit. So,
it's an important detail. I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Not even the bun. He just wanted the hamburger, meat, and fruit.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, and we took him to the airport, and I was in the driver in the car, and Mark walked him down San Francisco toward the gate. And when Mark came back, he said, Bruce, he barely made it. He's and 2 weeks later, sure enough, he's gone.
Wow.
It was that close. So anyway, yeah, there's that. That's just to show you what we were doing.
And where is this at? Is this at his house that you set this up?
No, this is in St. Petersburg, Florida. That's where Kathy's mother lived.
Oh, okay.
Backyard. I just took it along and pitched it wherever I went for the heck of it. Showing off.
Let's see.
This one's kind of important because in some ways it marks the beginning of the end, Chase, of what North Face was. This store, I think in Hap's core, he was a retailer. I think he believed in retail, and the North Face retail is very strong today.
Yeah.
I'm quite sure of that. And it started as retail. And he started working in the ski hut. So I think, and he also always liked the idea of going from raw material to retail pricing. So when you wholesale, you know, you're leaving all this money out there for the next guy. And he thought, maybe I could go all the way, develop, design, source, produce, and retail. And if you do that, that's great. The only difficulty with that is at each step of that, you can lose money as well as make money.
Right.
And somehow that became a constant problem of like, how can you invest that much money and have no return? Anyway.
Let's see, there's a few here.
You know, I did write a little of this history for Alan Tabor.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think I've seen some of that on his website.
Yeah, I wrote a series of a couple things that just tried to give that, but that was really not about the industry because I was writing about this.
Oh, and then this is your narrative, kind of that timeline of the oval.
I just found that like last night. I haven't seen
That's a good find. That's nice to have that. You wrote this in about 78, you said?
I'm probably more like 77.
Okay.
Let's see. It would have been preparing to go to the pole sleeve bowl. So I think probably late 77 or early 78. Yeah.
Oh, I loved these. I've seen some pictures of Bob that are floating around online. There's one in particular that I love. That's him with his head inside of a geodesic model that he has, just kind of floating over his head like a halo almost. And so it's fun to see some of these other pictures of Bob and you and Hap in here. But
yeah.
This is the assembly of the first.
Yeah, the first tent to come off the line.
What was the significance of the freeze-dried ice cream for the christening?
That was the rage, you know. You went backpacking and you roughed it and you hiked 6 miles in and you had some freeze-dried ice cream. It was just kind of...
It's very on brand.
Yeah.
Seemed to be fitting at the time. Those are great.
Pardon me?
Oh, it seemed like that would have been fitting.
Yeah, it was fitting. That's all. Yeah. It's just
fitting. Let me do a full screen again because I think that's all the pictures.
There you go. Yeah. Okay.
No, that's helpful. Just thank you for walking through some of those to give some context. But we should probably wrap it up here. We could always do a second one of these, but I just appreciate you taking time to record your place in all of this. You know, I've seen bits and pieces and I've heard different stories from different people. This has helped bring a lot of that together.
Let me show you one more thing. See this little beauty right here?
Yeah.
Okay, this is no fasteners at all. It's just a pattern. The center is little magnets, all spheres, just held together by magnetism. And the outside are springs that are just put in the end of that washer. And there's no screws, no glue, no nails. It's patterns. This is what fascinates me. And it is of no practical use. It's just this.
Well, I guess with that said, if you could look back on your contributions to the industry, maybe that, what do you feel like that is? What are you most proud of, I guess, from your time in the outdoor industry? Maybe not even contributions, but what are you most proud of?
I'd say the catalog dedication. I think that putting that right square in the middle of North Face. And at that time, we were sending out 250,000 catalogs because you'd send every dealer 100 or 200, depending how big they were. I mean, that was widely distributed. I think that's probably it. What else I could think of? Of course, the oval and naming the oval. I'm proud of that. I mean, I came up with that name.
Where did some of that come from? I know part of that is the shape, but
well, it's just again, it's just one of those things where I was riding my motorcycle and coming back and from somewhere, and I said, well, just thinking, oh, it just popped. That's it. It's intention. It's intentional. It's not. We didn't accidentally make it oval, and it's a tent, and it's attention. It's intention. I mean, it's just a play on words that I thought, hey, why not? And it stuck.
Well, there's something about naming tents. The outdoor industry has done a really good job of naming tents, whether it's the elliptical arch or the oval intention or the early winter's omnipotent. There's just, for some reason, the tent names in the outdoor industry are fantastic.
Mark had dandelion too.
Oh, dandelion. Yeah.
Is Andy lying in it?
Ah.
He didn't call it the dandelion.
For some reason, I don't know. Maybe it was just that time, right? There's an added level of craftsmanship. You were hand making these tents. There's something about the names of the tents that is equally. Seems like there was just as much care and attention that went into the name of the tent as the product itself back in that time.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this.
Of course.